All right. Hello, everyone, again. Uh, Welcome to our podcast, The Ranting Pedagogue. My name is Mohannad. This is another episode from our podcast, and I am a fellow at the Virginia Tech's Graduate Academy for Teaching Excellence, and our academy is hosting a number of episodes by a number of hosts with a number of guests. So you'll see other people in my place, you'll see other people in my guest's place in the future. And this podcast is about discussing some of the academic and pedagogical topics related to our community at Virginia Tech and at large. And before I introduce my guest, I would like to emphasize that the opinions expressed here are solely our individual opinions and do not represent VT Grade or the school or any other organization or institution. That being said, I would like to introduce my guest. I'm very excited to introduce Zuleka Woods. She is a doctoral candidate in the Planning, Governance, and Globalization program and a master's student in the Public Health program at Virginia Tech. Currently, she works with the Virginia Tech Graduate School as a graduate assistant in the Office of Recruitment, Diversity, and Inclusion, ORDI. Her current research interest centers on race and the power structures in international programs, as well as Black maternal health and reproductive justice. Zuleka serves as the president of the African Graduate Student Organization, AGSO, here at VT. Welcome, Zuleka.
Thank you, Mo. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm very happy to host you. I would say I've known you closely over the past about a year especially through the GPP 2022 program.
Yes.
The Graduate Perspective Program, Global Perspective Program.
Yes.
And I want to talk a little bit about this at some point today. But yeah, having been on this trip with you have really let me see how excited you are about diversity and inclusion and your unique and very valuable opinion on this subject matter.
Yeah.
So I would love to talk about this today, as well as your teaching experience, of course, and the classes you teach, and your pedagogical methods.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
VT grade is something I hear a lot about. So I'm excited to be a part of this podcast.
Yeah. So we are. Okay. So before we start, I've already introduced you, but I would like to know a little bit more about your background and how you got here, both in terms of what made you want to be a graduate student in the field you're studying, as well as what made you want to be so involved in diversity and inclusion and be part of the Diversity and Inclusion Center at VT.
Oh, okay. Well, how I got here, I am in the Planning, Governance, and Globalization program, which is an interdisciplinary program. It's an international relations, international affairs sort of program, political science, a little bit of everything in there. But I have a higher education background, so prior to that, I have a master's in higher education administration. So I worked at universities here in Virginia as well, as in Boston, Massachusetts, at Northeastern University. So my passion was always about working and giving student resources. So I worked in a cultural center. I've worked in a first generation student center. I've worked in student affairs, so to speak. And prior to that, I worked at a hospital community service. That's where my public health come from. Doing a lot of intervention, public health intervention, injury prevention here and there. And then back home, obviously I'm from Liberia, West Africa. I figured what kind of skills do I have to bring to this? And there was a lot of policy related NGO work. And so hence I came back to school so that I can do that to be able to help my country and to be able to do a lot more than what I was doing with student affairs and higher education.
That's absolutely fabulous.
Yeah.
So am I to understand you're after finishing your degree, are you planning to go back to NGO work, or are you planning to, I don't know, like you teach, we've talked about you teaching some classes. Is that part of your interest? But Or is it too early to tell?
No, it's not too early. I think it's a little bit of both. I love the academy. I love the space. I love what it represents. But I also really like working where I am now in the Office of Inclusion and Diversity. So my ideal dream job will be to be at a center and having to teach classes, right? So I love teaching, but I want to marry that with, because the conversation you have in the classroom, sometimes they come in, you teach your course, they leave. You don't get to see that part of students that we see in the diversity office, where you see the whole of the student, like family affairs, regular affairs, financial affairs, event planning, social affairs, and the academic. So I want to be able to be involved with the whole student. And I feel like teaching sometimes robs you of that because you're so focused on just the subject matter that you can. But I do love teaching. I think it's one aspect of it. It's not the whole thing, but I think it's an aspect of the graduate experience. So I'm hoping, even in the NGO route, like whatever work I do with community service, community projects, I hope I can be able to teach people. I think my goal, or if I left this world, what I want to be able to teach people how to do things. And one of the things that I'm really good at is getting people together, and I want to be able to marry that. That's why I have the public health degree and the PhD, because for me, it's important to do community work, but it's also important to teach people not the right way, but ethical way to do this work, right? So people go back home, they do all this research, they bring all this aid, and sometimes they really don't know the community. And I think it's important to have locals in those spaces that understand the community and know what they're doing and say, this is how you do it and this is not how you do it. So I think that's where my passion comes from, for teaching people to do things in an ethical way.
I see. So it's you're really driven by the community. It's not something personal like, oh, you love physics. Like, some people are like, oh, I love physics and I wanted to do physics. It's for you, it seems it's a lot more focused on like the end goal, which is the community.
Which is the community, the bigger picture. Yeah, I think the community, even with physics, I think a lot of people do a lot of research, and sometimes it's the marriage between the work that we do in academic and the reality, right? So sometimes we get so caught up in our papers and our research that we forget that it should have some sort of implementation. I mean, not everyone, but sometimes your research should be able to get off the page into the lives. Like you see the lived experience of what that could do. Yeah, but I mean, my dad was a chemistry teacher, so I have no problem with that aspect of it, but I'm a social scientist, so people and feelings and community is where I thrive.
I see. Actually, you bring up a really good point. I mean, I'm digressing a little bit here, but you bring up a really good point. It's like when we're doing graduate school, we're so focused on the current paper and the current research, and I don't know if it's a product of modernity or like, science has not science. Let's say research has advanced so much that you can only do so little. Push the boundaries so little in research. Like it feels sometimes insignificant. But I guess what I want to ask is how do you go about it? Because like you get so lost in this detail. How do you remind yourself of the big picture, or how can you enact this big picture on your 5-year life of grad school?
Right. So one of the things I'm doing now in public health, I'm involved with this really incredible program where they're looking at scientific knowledge and cultural wisdom, right? To see how those two come together to help Black maternal health in the U.S., right? So I think one of the things that they do is a data party, where wherever you write on paper, you call a bunch of people together and you try to translate that to them who's not in the field, right? So if you're doing community work, I can write a really nice paper, present at a conference, all these numbers and statistics, but the people I'm trying to help, if they don't understand that, what is the point, right? So I think that's how it is. A lot of times I write paper or things I do. Even I come from a first generation family of people who don't understand what I'm doing, right? It's not like they don't. They know I'm getting a PhD. My sister has a PhD, but there is also like, what exactly is this research, and how does that, like, what does that? You want to be a teacher, so that's it. But there's more to what we do, obviously. So I think you have to be, whatever I do, I always have to remind myself, how does this translate to the everyday man, right? Because I'm surrounded by everyday people in community, my family. It's like this every day. I'm not going to be with a whole bunch of PhD people all the time. So I think it's important to be able to translate what we write or what we research in the lab, whether it's quant or qualitative or whatever data set you have, that you have to How do you give that? How does that make sense? It doesn't have to be everything is not community driven, but even if it's intricacies of how cell phone works, you have to be able to explain it, right? Because even the most genius person, you don't know a subject until you can explain that to someone who don't know it, if that makes sense.
Right.
So if it's so complicated that nobody will understand it, then I feel like that's when we're like robots now at that point. You're not really, at the core of being a student is a person. So I have to remind myself constantly, as much as I want to be tenure track and this, all the things that you have to do. You have to present at a conference, you have to do this, you have to publish, you have to do peer. You have to still remember somewhere in that research that people, like the reason why I'm a social scientist is because of people. So I have to remember what drives me and what is that data going to do. What paper like you're going to write. My latest piece of paper that I wrote now is how Africa's image look in the US, right?
Right.
So it's like, why does that matter? Because if a lot of times if it's misrepresented, because I walk around and I say, oh, I'm African. What does that mean for people? Because this is the US. I don't live in Africa. I live in the hyphen of the US and in this place. So it's important for people to understand what this is. I have to educate what I want people to see, what I want to. So it's not just destitute and poverty. So what do you want people to know? Why is that important? How do you represent? So how can you educate people to go beyond what they've been fed over a long time, right? So that's a research that is personal to me. It's professional too, because I get to do that, and I also get to practice my skills of analyzing images and what does that mean. So it's important to do research, but we have to also remember and what they say in research. Anything you do, you have to be like, so what or and what? What does that mean for people? And so I keep that reminds me every day.
I see. That's really interesting. I mean, I always think about this because I work in a STEM field, and I always envy, let's say, people like you who like their specialties in like the humanities, and I feel in the humanities it's somewhat still possible to remind yourself like, why am I doing this? Because it is about the people, whether it's sociology or psychology or politics, or it is about the human and the community at the end. And I try to always like think about that like from the STEM perspective. It's like, how can I learn from that in the STEM? Because it's really hard when my paper is about the eigenvalues and vectors and whatever. And it's like, okay, like I'm 10 steps away from the community. Like, how do I bridge this gap?
Yeah.
It is very challenging for me.
It is. It can be very challenging. I think I have friends that are doing a lot of work with minerals, and sometimes I try to remind them like the bigger picture. Sometimes it might not be a direct link to say like, because if you're doing stuff with minerals, you understand where they come from, how they mine, the history. For us as social scientists, we're like, how does that matter to people? Like this cell phone that I have right now, we talk about the minerals in them, the country it come from, why is there a lot of conflict there, what is going on, the politics of that region, right? And then for you're just like, how do we fix this thing? And what? So I think sometimes it's the product, but then there's a connection to people. So for you, it doesn't necessarily have to be how does this affect people. It can be how does the product I make useful to people or to the system or to a policy. So it's a lot of different networks that can connect. It doesn't necessarily have to be that directly, but we all need each other.
Yeah, that's true. And certainly like in STEM, like I work in machine learning, and there's now talk about machine learning and social justice and fairness and all these.
Oh my goodness.
But we don't all get to work on those.
I think there was a chatbot is called now, AI chatgpt.
ChatGPT. Yeah.
Oh my God! Yeah, we had a whole conversation about this with some friends the other day. So
did you find some terrifying insights?
Yeah, I mean it's not terrifying. I think it's adjusting. It's how we're changing, because I think there was a newspaper article where it took the MBA test and it passed, and there's another one where you can just enter in and they write essay. And as people who are teaching, we're trying to teach students to think, but if they could just say, write me an essay on, refugees. Yeah. Right from a policy, and they could it does that, and then the next morning if you do it again, it does a new. So it's not even like they're copying one thing. 3 students can do the same thing, and it'll all be. It's mind-blowing.
I know someone who's writing his dissertation
on that,
and he used ChatGPT to like generate paragraphs from a table,
oh my
like
God.
Almost entire chapters. So I'm like, and it really works.
It works.
Like, yeah, it works.
In a way, you want, you
So-
know, from the GTA, from the teaching point, you want to be like, is that fair? Because you want to teach students to think critically. But then from the student point, it's so much work we do. So it's like, is it helping us? Is it hurting? Is there a happy medium? I don't know.
Right. Like, definitely from like the pedagogical perspective, like the grading now,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you have to pose the questions in a way, I don't know, that makes it hard to generate an answer using ChatGPT. And I only started like recently thinking about this. I do not have answers, but I think this is a really interesting topic. Like, what is the meaning of education after this? Because you can take this one step, like maybe sometime in the future we would have a chip in our mind that just give us the answer, right?
Yeah.
So this is one step towards that direction, right? Like
Yeah.
now there's something that gives us the answer in an English language. And
Yeah. In a
so what
different
is
way.
the meaning of knowledge? What is the meaning of learning in this context?
But think about it this way. Think about references, like Zotero or Mendeley, the things that help us sort of references, right? Maybe 20 years ago, before there was this thing, people were actually sitting in the library with 20 books trying to figure that out. Then
Right.
this software come where you put it in, everything just come up, right? So I'm not saying it's the same thing, but I'm thinking, are we evolving? Like, is education evolving that we're going to get to this point where as teachers, you know they're going to use whatever. So just like you
Right.
said, so we just have to figure out a way to ask a question
Right.
that is not, I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know. I really don't know. Like, because what is the, like, it becomes at some point, is it about memorization or is it about knowing how to is it about knowing the thing or knowing how to get to the answer or knowing how to form a query to get the answer?
Right.
You know, like what is it exactly that you need to master to be called educated?
Right.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. At the university level, we're supposed to be trained, or at least at the PhD, how to think, right? To think critically and to come up with all these ideas on our own. But even then, we still have to, like, I can't say something to you without quoting who said that in my dissertation. I have to say this, and this, peer reviewed. Like, I have to. So you lean on other knowledge to create knowledge, right?
Right.
I feel like this thing is just now introducing a whole new subject of who gets to create knowledge, who gets
Right.
to decide if this is new, because this AI is taken from other things,
Right.
just like a lit review, except
Right.
that it's doing it really fast. And on the internet, it's taken from other, because if I say write about this, it does.
It does.
And the next day, if you did that, it's gonna give you, because you can say from the policy perspective, from the education. It's scary. It really is. When I think about it, I'm like, oh my God. I can't imagine what the university would look like in another decade with all of this stuff.
Yeah. I think
Maybe we can just do it with.
We'll just have to wait and see in 2 years where.
But, and the good thing, maybe PhD will only be like 2 years now. Because you won't have to be waiting to go. See, I have to do my literature review. You would just
Right.
enter some. That's very scary. But like,
Yeah.
I think that must have been how people felt when Google and other things were introduced, where you can just ask a question and
Right.
a whole lot is just right there in the information age. I feel like people were just like, just as alarmed, like everything is out there now, everything. So maybe.
Yeah,
But
so
it's-
maybe the next challenge would be like people would now need to do like 4 PhDs. Since you can do one in 2 years, then how many PhDs
my
do you
God.
have?
Just like the masters now, because it's so
yeah,
true.
That's true. That is
It's
true.
gonna get to the point where people are gonna have to say doctor. That's so funny. I hope it never gets that. But universities are catching on, and they're like, blocking, or you can't use that or something.
Right.
But for how long? I think they might have to go back to the drawing board and figure a way
Yes.
how to use it.
I think the philosophy of education itself has to be reconsidered. Like
I
it's
agree.
not just about like allowing or disallowing something. It's like the philosophy, the core has to be reconsidered.
Reconsider. I agree. Yeah.
Okay, going back to where we were, I want to ask you actually one question about research versus teaching.
Okay.
So you were saying, research should be something that the common person is approachable to the common person. Like you should be able to explain it to a common person that does not do a PhD, right?
Right. I mean, not all the time. If your research is for the common person. Does that make
Right.
sense? So if you say you're a social scientist and you're making this, your question is, how does this with the community? But then it's just all for academics. You're just talking to each other, then no. But if you're doing something with food packaging, people in that area should be able to discuss that, right? But if you're doing stuff with, like my work is supposed to be about community-based doula services for Black women,
Right.
pregnant. If they don't know what you're saying and all this data numbers doesn't make sense to them, then who am I doing the research for?
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense because, like we said, like some research is a lot more technical than other research, right?
Yeah.
But you also talk about like the big picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like even if it's not directly about the community, we should also think about the impact, right?
Right.
But I also want to ask about. Okay, I don't know how it is in your field, but in my field, at least in many STEM fields, I think, there is a clear disconnect between research and teaching. So research, like in my field, for example, when I read a paper, I feel like when people write a paper, they're not writing it for you to understand it. They're just writing it to get published, exactly. Which, like, for me, the first year or two of doing a PhD, I'm like, why am I not understanding these papers? And then as I knew more people and talked to this, it seems like it is intentional, actually. Like
Yeah.
it is not the purpose of the researcher to write in a way that is easy to understand. On the other hand, you have teaching, right? When we teach classes, I think, I don't know if you agree, but I think we're supposed to be well understood when we do the instruction of the class, right?
Right.
So what do you think about this disconnect? Like, why? I understand here the objective is publishing. Here the objective is not publishing. It's the class itself. Or I don't know what you think about how to evaluate whether teaching is done well. But do you think we can bridge this gap? How can we bridge this gap? What are your thoughts on this disconnect?
Right. I think it's a perfect explanation of what I talked about with bringing your research. You do the research for academics, right? You're doing that just speaking to each other, because I don't think that a lot of times the research is not meant to be outside of that journal, outside of that academic community, right? I think teaching is the opportunity for a researcher to then make their research approachable, if that makes sense. Because if you say you're an expert in this field or whatever it is that you're doing, you should be able to teach this to freshmen or second year grad students, because then as incoming professors, right, you should be able to teach us how to do this thing that you're an expert in. So I think teaching, the marriage between the two is for people who are in the classroom to be able to, that's the opportunity as academics, to don't talk down to students, but to water down, so to speak, so make your research approachable so you can talk about it in a way that is not. Because if I told you now, Mo, I'm going to teach you how to tie a string, my shoe, I can just do it without, you don't think about it. You just know you tie it. But if I had to teach a 1 or 2 year old, you have to remember they have a whole song, the loop, and all these things, because you have to remember how to do it now. And now you who do this all the time, you're like, wait a minute, you hold this and you hold this, because then you're doing it for someone else who don't know what you're doing, if that makes sense.
Right.
So I think teaching is very important to the academy, is very important for research, because that is how you make sense of, because if not, which is a lot of times, sadly, academics just talk to each other. We really just talk to each other. When you go to these conferences and other places, like you said, some of these, even the abstract, you will probably pick up 2 or 3, if you're not in that field, words that you understand. Everything is just very much because you want to publish, or you want to be known, or you want to, whatever reason you have outside of for the sake of learning and knowledge. And I think teaching is so much important to the academy, because that is how you get to make this scary research thing more approachable, I think. I think sometimes, a lot of times, sadly, the academy makes it seem like teaching is secondary. Like, it's just do your research, do your grants, make the money, and then I have this one class. Like, I've talked to professors and people, they're like, unfortunately, I have 2 classes this semester, or I have,
Right.
and they'd be so happy if they have like a GTA or to be like, just take all the work, because I have more important things to do, like go and save the world or fix, like they have things to do, but I don't want to teach, these students. But at the end of the day, the students should be the pillars of the university, right? We are like the core.
Right.
That's why you have a university, because you're teaching someone. But I think now this publishing culture and this almost like look at me kind of thing with Twitter and everything else, people are famous for being,
Right.
Whatever it is. So I think there's a disconnect there. But my thoughts is I'm, of course, much rather the teaching aspect than the research. But you need to be a researcher to be in an academy, because you have to prove to other academics that you can do what they're doing.
Right, but do you not think it is possible to write the research in a way that, less obscure, let's say? I mean, maybe there's a difference between your field and my field. I don't know. I don't want to generalize, but in the STEMs, especially, okay, I'm going to talk about machine learning because that's really
That's
my
where you
field.
know. Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to generalize, but in like data analytics and machine learning, when people write, like the research has become like so specialized that I think I can confidently say, if I write a paper and then someone else who is still in machine learning research reads the paper, they will not know everything they need to know to understand the paper. And there's like page limit. There is, it's just like so condensed that even if you read the paper 3-4 times, there will be so much knowledge gap that I feel we got to a point, and again, I don't know about your field, but in my field, that we got to a point like people skip the whole methodology. It's like, okay, show me results.
And yeah,
does it perform better than the previous paper? Cool. That's what it is. And the method itself, as long as it looks good, right?
I think it's the same. It's the same in my field too. I think now I'm starting my 4th year in my PhD program, right? When I got here, a couple of things I started to understand. At first, you don't read all the papers. Nobody does. I didn't know that, because it's a lot of work that they give you. But then once you, like, as a 4th year compared to my 1st year, obviously things change. But like you, people are saying a lot of stuff, especially theoretical heavy things, that you're like, what are you even saying? Philosophical. Like, they get really deep into what could be or what should be and what. And as someone who's very community based, like how does this translate to what I need to say? But you need to talk that way to the people who's at this research conference to be able to be in that room or in that space, like to earn your place in that space, right?
Okay, so it's about earning.
It's about earning your space, your place in that space, if that makes sense, right? Because if you don't talk that way, if you don't quote the certain people, that there's the gurus in the field, and their papers, as you know, is like you have to be a certain level to read it, because they're not writing to students, they're not writing to So I think it's important. I don't want to say it's important to do that, but I think sadly that's a culture. It's hierarchy in academics. This is like, that's why a lot of people strive to get a certain, once you get there, then you have to get there. There's always this hierarchy of how things are done. And what separates those things is things like this. Like, you write at a certain level, you read certain things, you have to be a certain way. It's
right.
You're not talking to the right person, because I think it's all pretentious. Like, I think I'm like, why do you have to say all of this thing if you, at the end of the day, we are all, you want this. But again, hierarchy. You have to say it to be in that room, to earn your space in that room, right? To be able, because even as a public health practitioner, if I said certain things, people will say, yeah, this is nice. But if someone who has like a doctorate in public health, right, said something else, people listen to him instead of listen to me. Even if I did 200 years of community service work and he doesn't, so credentials, this is the space for that. Academics is all about what do you have? Right. How many papers have you published, Mo, to talk about this machine learning theory? I don't think you will credit you. Like, I've published 14. They're like, oh, we should listen to Mo. Right? I think there's a conversation before where there was someone, how sometimes you publish, there's 3 people and you say et al. So there was a room, a woman was in the room, and there's a lot of men, and this person said, you should read Johnson et al. And something. And the lady's like, funny thing, I'm Johnson. Like, and they were like, really? We thought, because her last name, we thought, because obviously because she was a woman, she shouldn't, she can't be possibly in that room. So I think this hierarchy in academia that just makes me really mad. But again, as someone who came to academia to be able to get in certain rooms, I understand, because some of the work that I want to do, do I necessarily need a PhD? No, but would it listen if I had a PhD?
Right, of course.
Yes. So that's why.
So we're playing the game.
Yes.
Of this culture. Do you think people like you and me, and by the way, I think I'm talking to the right person.
Okay,
like,
just
this
making
is
sure, because
this is the right person.
I'm like,
Do you think we can at some point change the game?
yeah, I think so.
Like,
I think the younger generation, because even now they have a thing called scholar activism, right?
Oh,
so older
okay.
professors, we in the social science field, we didn't have that before, right?
Okay.
So now you could be both, talk the talk and walk the walk. Right, so now you could be an activist, and you be so a scholar and you can put them together. There's professors that have that in it. I'm a scholar activist, so you could be both. You don't just have to be writing in this dark room and publishing paper. You could do that. You can go into the field and do actual work, see what your work is doing. You can do that. So I think as the younger generation of people, they're doing. There's even people like they have interdisciplinary program with the STEM, where the STEM marriage social science. They have those program like. Here, Virginia Tech, STS, I think it's like Science, Technology, and Society, right? Okay. Where those things come together, we figure a way you're like, I don't necessarily have to only do this. It's not just because, think about it, just like with research, qualitative and quantitative, sometimes they're like, oh, is this really, how do you measure that? I need numbers because numbers never lie, right? And then we have people who are like mixed methods. You could do both. You can have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You could do surveys and you could do numbers. So I think in general, this new society, things are changing. Like, it doesn't have to be this or that. You don't have to be a researcher or a teacher. You don't have to be a community worker or academic, right? So there's all these avenue of change that is happening. I don't know if it will happen with us or maybe the next generation, but it's evolving. I think the academy of being this all-knowing professorate that's like, you can't question me and things like that. I think that's changing a little bit. Is it changing as fast as I would like? No, absolutely not. It is not doing that. But it's getting there to the point where you can do a little bit of both. You can do numbers and you can do feelings. You can do science, like the STEM, and you can do social science. You can marry the two. So I think this is evolving, not as fast as I would like, but there's hope. I'm hopeful.
And I have the impression it's evolving in your field a lot faster than the STEM. Like, I have not heard of this
scholar activism.
What is it called?
Scholar activism.
Scholar activism.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have not heard of it, so it does not exist where I come from.
Yeah, so it's getting there. I think, because even with social media too, before people just didn't. Like, I didn't have professor putting this stuff on there. Now we have professors that's on Twitter all the time. They have a whole academic Twitter. That's all they do is talk about who published what and what does that mean. Even the hashtag sometimes I don't understand, but it's in their field. They understand. So that's important for them, yeah. But I think the academy is changing. Places like PT Great and GPP, all those places, like, I would never imagine that I would go on a trip with someone who's in machine learning, like a study abroad program where I have people with food packaging, as you know, and machine learning and sociology, and there's all these different people who before just don't talk to each other. You stay on your side, I stay on my side, and we're both VT people, but we never get to talk, even though you're doing similar things as they're forcing you to teach. They're forcing me. We can share a lot of in common where you, as a teaching assistant, you get all this workload. We can talk about that. But then we didn't think before you can connect over that because you're in a different field. I'm a different field. Don't talk to me. But across the board, we can connect as graduate students. We can connect as immigrants. We can connect. There's a lot of different things. So
that's true.
I think it's good that the academy is changing.
And like, I think having connected with you and other people from different fields, I actually had a much better understanding of how teaching is different in different fields. Research methodologies are different fields. Like the culture is different fields, and I think that's how we grow and change. Because if I have only mingled with people in my field, things will just stay the way they are, right?
Yeah.
And I will never see new approaches to things.
True.
So.
Yeah, even teaching. I mean, I know we're not there yet, but when you talk about teaching, when I tell people, oh, I taught, and in my course, I got to change the curriculum, the syllabus, and they're like, what? you can't because obviously the teaching experiences in fields are different. They're like, you can't do that. How do you get to do that? Or because some people get taught by this teacher, this is a syllabus, you stick to it, this is what you're supposed to do. You don't really have leverage to, like, your voice as a GTA is not known as a graduate student in that class. You just teach the material as it is given to you, right? Or there's some people who are allowed to just change the whole course, make it their own, and do all of this stuff. So I think it varies from field to field what people can and can't do as teachers.
True. Okay, let's talk about teaching then.
Yes, let's talk. We didn't even talk about diversity.
No, I'll leave it till the end. But this feels like a good transition since we're talking about teaching. Okay, so tell us more about the classes you're teaching.
Okay, so
or you have taught.
Great. So I served as a teaching assistant for the graduate school diversity course. It's called the Global Diversity in the Global Society. So that. And then I've also taught in the political science department a course called Women and Gender in Politics, right? So those are my teaching experience here. More so on the diversity side because I've served as a TA for that course for 3 semesters, right? So in that class, like any TA, I assist the teacher. So I help with the first semester, helping with grading, with topics that I enjoy talking about, like biases, representations, like those sort of things. So I present on those topics, but mostly assisting the teacher in a way that I can help her or him. At the time it was a man, now it's a woman. So however way I can assist them, I assist them that way. I think for me, that class is really important as far as conversational piece because it's a interactive class. It's not just clicking through slides and you read. It's like today, if we're going to talk about biases, we talk about what does that mean, like intrinsic bias, different kind of biases. What is it? We watch videos about it, have people talk about what does that mean. What did you think about biases before you came to this class? So we talk to students, right, about it. So it's small groups a lot of times in that class. That's the teaching method in that class. In the political science class, women and gender studies, how that class works, first you have, as a graduate student, you have to put in a bid to the State Department for some projects that they have, like, and then you get selected, and then you have the course here with Virginia Tech, through Virginia Tech. It's called Diplomacy Lab. So it's a lab where you have a graduate student teach a lot of undergraduate students in a subject area.
So who are you selected by again?
The U.S. Department of whatever, one of those big departments.
And these students are not part of a degree, they just take this class?
No, they're part of so it's part of the political science class. They all have to take a Diplomacy Lab class, right?
Okay.
And a lab is special topics. So when you register, it's called special topics.
Okay.
And so you pick whichever topic is available at the time. And those topics are selected by graduate students who then bid for them through the State Department.
I see. Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
So, for example, you could be like, I want to do whatever machine learning thing the State Department have going, right?
Okay.
You apply. And the State Department is like, we have 5 different things here that we're doing. One in Kenya, one in Mozambique, whatever places they have their thing. And then you're like, I want to do this. Because it's a lab, it's not really, there's no guarantee that they're actually going to do your program, but they want people to do the free research for them.
Okay.
So there's, okay, we agree, Mo, you're going to do this one that's going to be in Lebanon, for example. So you then pick that class and you get the students register. So they would just assign like a regular class here at VT. You have 17 students or 30 or whatever students you have. And you work on that project or teach that whole class the way at the end, whatever product you create, or because it could be one product, it could be research driven, it could be a paper, like you have to present that to the State Department and say, this is what we have for you, suggested, use it as you want, right, if you want. Okay. So for our project, it was women and gender in politics, like how can we get more women involved and things like this. And they say, you have to teach, they give you like the old syllabus. Somebody who taught this class before, this is what they use, this is how they teach, and then they have a lot of gender and feminism books and all of these things. And then they have like some sociology books, some political science books. And then they say, teach. And then you have to teach. So we had about 17 students in our class. And then you meet, it's like a regular register, Monday, Wednesday, whatever time. And a bunch of undergrads, so like freshmen, sophomore. Mm-hmm. Virginia Tech has a political science department that has like a 5-year program where they get their first degree and a master's in 5 years instead of like 2. So it's mostly those students that you get to teach. And yeah, so that course for me, first when I got the syllabus, it just seemed like it was very whitewashed. Like it was very all these people that I know of, but it's very westernized, I should say, instead of whitewashed.
Okay.
It's very Western. It's very like, I don't know. I would say, okay, so we're talking about women and gender. Is it possible for us to bring in? First, I emailed Virginia Tech has a women and gender society or office here. I say, hi, do you have some recommended women and gender that are not Western books that I can incorporate into this course that I'm supposed to teach? And they were like, yeah, we'll be happy to help you. The director was really great. And then...
So, sorry to interrupt. When you say not Western, are we referring to the nationality of the author? What makes a book not Western?
Perfect. So that too, the nationality of the author, yeah, but the content too, because the content of the book in context. So if you're reading a book about women and gender studies, and it's mostly focused on, because sometimes in there they'll say, let's talk about some of the great women in history. And then you look at the historical context, and all of the women there are from Europe or the US, right? That they put it, say, let's talk about one of the greatest person in politics, and they say the Iron Lady from the UK, right? And they talk about all of these, or they say women have never had the opportunity to be in government, right? And you're talking to someone my country's had a women president. And I've had a lot of other people, other countries that have a quota system where women have to be a part of the government, right? But because we've never had it in the US, so now the context of this book is like women have never been included in politics, right? So you have to think about the context, but also the author is right. He can write from, or they can write from a perspective that they don't understand. So I think it's important to think about Western context and how that context shaped the view of the students in the classroom. Or they could say a blanket statement like, a lot of women in the Middle East are so oppressed, and because they don't have their voice there, and women, something like a line like that in the textbook, a student now could leave that class thinking, yeah, women don't have rights in the Middle East because they're oppressed, right? And not to say any of that is wrong. We have to contextualize a lot of things before you teach it to students. So if this book is written by someone who feels that way, and this is their context from where they're coming from, or they say, feminism is about protecting women's rights, and women are the same, we have to stick together, right? And then you have to think about, there's layers. I think we talked about that last time, intersectionality, right? We can be the same gender, but we have different issues. Like someone who is differently able would not be able to sit at this desk like me and you right now, but we're all the same, right? So that's where equality, inclusion, like there's a difference in some of those things. We can all be at the same table, but someone might not be able to sit in this chair because they have a physical illness or something. So I think it's important when I'm picking a book or a text for it to not just be, that's why this course in diversity is called Global Society. So not just gender or a specific part of the world, but if we really want to be global, as we say, the university is a global space, we have to include other voices other than the dominant Western voices, which is nothing wrong. You have to know Shakespeare. It doesn't matter what part of the world you are. You have to know, some of these things. Like it's the great. But then there's also people who, doing writing that are not Shakespeare, that are from other region, that have great things to say. And we should just, mix it all up.
Right. I completely agree. Like this, especially this global view issue. Like I feel, especially in the I mean, I only really know in the US and maybe Canada, but when we view a subject, it's usually from the US current or historic perspective.
Yeah.
And I feel sometimes I don't have a clear opinion like about that, because obviously if you live in the US, okay, you are more connected to this land and this community, etc. But I feel like there is a tunnel vision in how the conversation happens. So like, for example, we obviously know like the history of civil rights and is very important in the US, right? And like the history of how slavery affected the people like African Americans, and even till today, obviously it had a lot of effect. But for example, sometimes when I talk to people, I think they think like slavery was an American problem, right? Even though it was a global problem, and in other parts of the world there were Asian slaves and Arab slaves and European slaves, right? So I think sometimes when we are not aware of like the global phenomena and we make it only a US phenomena, there is a big chunk of the conversation that is missing.
Precisely.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because a lot of times in the U.S., the global is the U.S. If that makes sense. Like, this is stuff like, this is how it's done. It's just because this is all that is available. Like, if you say anything, because the U.S. culture, which is true, the U.S. culture does get replicated at a lot of places around the world, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not a lot of other things. Like, I talk about this a lot, where there were more black people stolen from Africa that went to Brazil than they did to the U.S. So there's a lot more African Americans or black people in Brazil, right? So the connection to say that there are only black people here, like you were saying, like the slave trade did not just go one way.
Right.
The ships went a lot of places. There were more people that ended up in Salvador, like in Brazil, than in the U.S. But again, all that is taught in context here. In fact, it's only recently that even slavery was more than a page in the textbook, because they just glazed over, like, people came from Africa and they were stolen and they were here, moving on. This. Where there was a whole lot of other things that people didn't talk about before. Obviously, that's why the education piece is important, because what you're told in the classroom as future teacher is important, because what we are told in the classroom is that's our foundation for how we see the world, right? That's how we now think about what is happening in the world. That's what we know. Even images that we're fed in our media all the time, right? That's how terrorism came to be synonymous with people from the Middle East, because that's every time they talk about it, that's what we're shown. That's what they say. So if you come from a place, I have a lot of friends that come from like Senegal and other places that you dress Arab, or what the U.S. thing looks like, that you get charged, or you get pushed to the side of the line and said this is just a random check, because it's not like they want to profile, but this is what they've been told. This even before you were a U.S. custom agent, when you were in the classroom, when you were told this is what this looks like, right? So what we teach people is so important. That's why for me, when you're in the classroom, I know it's important to teach the subject matter, but you have to think, sometimes we even say diversity, equity, inclusion in our classroom. If I'm from a different country, I don't even know what that means. What does diversity, equity, inclusion means? And I say that a lot because I'm African, right? I didn't, and it's not like I didn't know I was black, but I never had a race when I was home. There wasn't, I didn't have to check to say, are you black? Are you, I didn't, there was not a thing until I came to the U.S. And then when I came to the U.S., you have to check, not just thing, you have to check black/African American. And I'm like, am I African American? Is that me? Am I black? So you have to think about these boxes that you get put into this space all the time. If I'm in Brazil, I'm not black or African American. I have a whole different kind of thing that they're going to call you there, right? If you're in some other place. So again, all of these social construct of who people are gets reinforced in the classroom. So it's our job, I think it's our job as future professors or as teachers or research assistants to, when you're molding the mind of people, think about what does this mean in context of the U.S. and outside of the U.S. What if you get a job outside of the U.S.? Now you're going to be like, I'm a diversity expert. And they say, what is diversity? It doesn't exist here. Mm-hmm. So you have to understand in context, what does this mean? Like, what does that mean for people that look like me? What does that mean for the whole classroom? Because what if I get a job in China? How am I going to translate?
Right. Yeah.
How are you going to translate
in China?
How do you translate that thing to these people? So that, I think that's why I hope a lot of my classes, I'm training students to think global beyond just what we know in the U.S.
Very interesting. Very, very, a lot to unpack there in this topic. One thing I wanted to ask you about the classes you're teaching. So you said you're a TA, right?
Yeah.
But also, from what I understand, you are teaching the class. Like, you're the person conducting the instruction of the class, right? Mm-hmm. Could you, I don't know if this is more specific to your department or more general, but generally, my understanding is the person that conducts the class is the instructor of record, okay? So does that class have an instructor, and what is the difference between your function in the class versus their function in the class? What is, like, how is this different? Because in my department, like, for example, I was an instructor of record a year ago, and the class is my class. Like I do instruction, I do everything. It's like 20 students. It's not a big class.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a TA, for example.
Right.
And generally, the TA in my department is just like grading, maybe creating some homeworks, but they don't do the instruction.
Yeah.
So how is it in your department, and what are your thoughts on the workload?
Right. So for both. So the other class I told you about, because it's a special class, like the political science class, you get to do it's just you. I didn't have a TA. 17 students, just me, because you just don't get a TA. So I get to teach the class the way I want to, change the syllabus, do everything, everything, instructions, everything. For the diversity course, is a little different because it's a graduate school course, and this is a school, a place that pride itself in giving GAs, or at least graduate students, opportunity to grow, right? So they want to see you do stuff. And because I've expressed my interest and I want to teach, I don't want to just correct paper and sit here. So then they say, you go to the syllabus and you pick an area of interest. Like I said, we talk about biases. I've talked about race. I've talked about like racial profile, like whatever things of interest for you as a student. That day in the class, you get to lead the lecture, right? That makes sense. So then the other times, the actual professor of the class would do that, right?
Okay.
So before that, when the man was teaching the course, I got to do just grading. Like you don't even have to come to class if you don't want to. You just, because it was Canva at the time was 2020, so it's COVID, so everything's online. You just have, when they submit their paper, you have to correct it. So I stay up and go to the essays, correct it, put the grade. There's a rubric, all of that stuff. You give it back to the teacher. That was a GA thing. So depending on the teacher that you have, your experience might be different. So in the diversity class that I have now with my current boss, once I decide what areas I want to teach on the syllabus, when our class comes, like February 18th, Zuleka is going to be presenting this lecture. So you get the materials, you show up and you do that. But you also help, like I show up early, just like this podcast place. I show up, make sure everything is on, do all this stuff for the class. Some people who is joining by Zoom, make sure, just do that, sit in the back of the classroom.
Right.
And then wait. And then, like just like any other TA, just assist if I need to. But if it's my day to teach, I teach. So I think it just depends on the department, yes, but also on the teacher.
Right.
Because if this teacher have like I know friends who are GAs for GTA that have like 2-3 classes that they have to assist with, but it's more than grading because the professor have like research or they go to conferences and other things. So now they have that weight on their shoulders of carrying the class, correcting the papers, doing all of those things. Then I have friends who are just only grading. They don't have to go to the classroom. They don't have to. They have office hours.
Right. So the reason I'm asking this is, like you said, it seems that your experience varies widely based on the department and the teacher. It does. Which sometimes concerns me. I mean, it's good that you got the opportunity to teach because you wanted to teach, right? Yeah. But then when we as TAs sign a contract that's saying, this is for a 20-hour work. Like if the experience varies so widely where some TAs only have to, maybe grade, while others have to teach and grade and do this and do that. So you could easily end up one person doing only 10 hours a week. Some people do 30, 40. But I think this goes back to the conversation of like this workload of the TAs, right? Like it has been a conversation for a while. Like, are the contracts of the GTAs fair?
No.
And no. Okay.
You know that.
We agree on that.
But that's what I'm saying. I wish a lot of us would connect more across, because whether you're in STEM or not, one thing that we all share as GTA, I don't care how great your advisor is, how great your appointment is, we're overworked. Period.
Right.
And that's one thing we across the board, from chemistry to food sciences to social sciences, because you have 20 hours only, and it's not possible for you to do what you were told in your contract in that 20 hours and be a student at the same time.
Exactly.
It's almost, even with 40 hours, if you're doing this 40 hours, it's not possible. So how are you supposed to do that, half of that? It's not possible, because even if you had 2 students to correct their papers, to honestly be truthful to that paper without just going through and checking off. You have to correct the paper, and then you have office hours, and then you have to, because in order to correct papers, let's not forget you have to know the subject matter. You're not just, so sometimes some GTAs I know, they have to even study before class, like to be acquainted with the materials because you're about to present, And some people come in. I know students now, like I'm the president of the African Graduate Student Org, right? The students come in, you've never taught before. You're coming from your master's program, boom, you're a GTA. Mm-hmm. Boom, here's your syllabus. Mm-hmm. You have this language barrier for some students who, English is not their first language. So I'm nervous. I have to talk to all these 17, 18-year-old cool American students. I'm questioning myself, one. It's a lot of, and they don't care. They're like, you teaching 4 classes.
Yep.
Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into that than just clicking through slides. For a teacher who's done this, some of them have been here since before we were born. They don't worry. The actual teachers, they like, I could do this with my eyes closed. But this might be my first time teaching. The teacher need a teacher. Like, I need someone to tell me if I'm doing this right? I wish GTA got like a teacher in the back, like you're sitting right now, and just watch me teach and then say, hey, this is what you did. Right. Except for the graduate school, like the future professor certificate that, they have like a class. Homer Mercy, bless his soul. Like he has a class like teaching pedagogy. Like how do you teach, like critical pedagogy, right? So this is a graduate class, a graduate course. I hope a lot of graduate students that want to go in the academy, but this is the only class here at Virginia Tech that have taught me how to teach, right? But this is because I specifically wanted to take this class because I'm interested in being a professor, and this is something offered. But not a lot of people, especially in STEM, there's not a lot of people that get told these things. You come in with a master's, because you want to do this. This is how you get your funding. Obviously, you want to be here, so.
And this really goes back to the point where you said, like, it seems the university really cares a lot, way more about research than teaching. Because I was instructor of record spring 2022, and I still remember, like, I've been wanting to teach for a while. I was at GTA for a couple of semesters, but I know the program coordinator, and I spoke to him. It's like, hey, I'm really interested in teaching. Is there an opportunity for me to be an instructor of record? And gladly, he gave me a capstone class, right? And I remember, like, I was so happy, and then, like, I waited for a week, and then another week, and, like, the semester was about to start. I'm like, is no one gonna come to me and talk to me about this class?
No.
Like, is someone gonna walk me through the syllabus? Is someone gonna tell me this is what we want you to teach? This is how you teach it? Nothing.
No.
And I remember, like, 1 week before the semester started, I sent an email, like, I don't even have anything, like, no syllabus, no curriculum, nothing. Like, can I talk to someone? They're like, yeah, just, this is the professor that taught it last semester. Just go talk to them and see what they have to say.
Yeah.
So I was really, like, surprised by the approach, because, like, from my perspective, I had 17 or 18 students, and, like, they are being introduced to entirely new concepts through me.
Yeah.
Right? If I do a bad job, that will not only impact their performance in this class, it will impact how they view this subject henceforth.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And, like, I don't know, maybe I'll dare to say, like, this carelessness about, like, how well the teacher is going to do in class, I think it has a big impact about the next, if I want to say, the next generation or the next batch of engineers or professors.
It does. That's why I take it seriously, our jobs in the classroom.
Right.
It's a big job. It's not. That's why it doesn't matter how far I get away from in the research. I always want to go, because in the classroom, like you said, this is how someone's forever gonna. Whenever there's certain concept, for example, they would think about you. They said, oh yeah, he did this, and this is whether you know it or not. The role of the teacher is very important in how you teach concept and things. And I know, because I went to school here in the U.S. for both my undergrad and my first master's degree, I know how Africa was shown and represented, and it's so important for me to be in this classroom, in this spaces, to be able to show people a different thing. Because it's one thing to just talk about it, but in my research, I don't know how many people are going to read it. I need to be in the classroom to talk to students and say why this is important, to introduce some other voices that is not just the dominant ones, right? So it's important, like you said, I think about it all the time. Like this person, whenever they think about this author that I'm now telling them about, like, hey, have you read this person? They're going to say, oh, there was a teacher in my class. Even if they don't, it's not a big thing. They're always going to remember that because we did that in the classroom. And it can happen nowhere else but in the classroom. Because like you, I felt such a weight. When I got the syllabus, they said, oh, this, and there was 17 students. I went on, I checked, and I was like, I was waiting because I still think someone would like chastise me and be like, you can't, nobody tells you, you just do these things. I'm like, I could do that? No. Like I'm waiting for like a professor to email me and say, hey, you know, this is how you teach. Nobody you're giving a class in the syllabus with 17 people staring at you and depending on you to tell them things.
Right.
It's a very scary feeling, but it's a great challenge and I like it.
No, I mean, I loved it. I still loved it. I just,
It's-
I don't know, what are your thoughts? Like, how can we, let's say in the future, we're the people who decide who teaches what, okay, in the department. How would you go about of making their life easier and not stress out the way you did,
Yeah, I think,
if any?
I think the first thing is like funding. Just like with the university, funding is important, right? So when people come in, if I have funding, they take someone, they say, hey, you're going to be my teacher but the question of, can you teach? It's just, I wish someone would just ask that too. Because not everyone can teach. You agree?
Sure,
Not
sure.
everyone
Not
can
everyone,
teach.
no.
People can be a subject master, but
Right.
they are
True.
terrible teachers.
Sure.
So they never ask GTAs, can you teach? Because even for the GA job, I have to tell you, we apply, you know, when you apply for, they ask you for experience. Have you worked in an office with students? Can you talk, like there's a whole interview. I don't know, do they do that for teachers? Do they say, can you teach? And you say, yeah, I taught in my country, you know, 1, 2. They say, did you teach in the US? You understand? Because as international students, it's not the same. Even as if you taught at a community college or if you taught online versus in person, now you're teaching future engineers things. That's different because it's
Right.
not the same. You understand? So I think people, one, I will ask people about their teaching. Two, what VT Great does is amazing. You have a lot of different workshops on
Right.
teaching people how to teach. That sounds crazy, but people don't know how to teach. Even if you've been doing it for a long time, it's a different subject matter. We just talk about this chat box and all these AI. There's things are changing over time, you know? So what are some things? Before, I remember when I was in college here in the U.S., like 2006, 7, we couldn't use our laptop. You couldn't bring laptop in the classroom. They would say, close it or you get in trouble. Now when I walk by, everybody have their, you have to. That's how they take notes. That's how, you know. So I think we have to keep oiling the machine. Like VT Great is important. You have a lot of different workshops, like the future professor certificate that they have here. But obviously, I understand the privilege of being here at the grad school. But there are people who here at Virginia Tech who's teaching now have never heard about VT Great, never heard about the, you know, GPP, anything, and they're teaching right now, and they're freaked out and thinking, how come nobody told me I could do this? And also, we don't even know we can speak back to authority because when they give you that syllabus, can you change that? Can I move things? I don't know if you can, you know, some students, we just think this is what you're told, you do that.
Right. That's
But
true.
we have leverage too sometimes to switch out something. Like there might be the old edition, you know, somebody might counter that person who's in this book now. You know, just we can switch it off for a podcast instead of like a long reading. There's things you can do that will get students actually involved and happy about reading. But
Right. I remember Professor Mursi in the pedagogy class brought this up. Like he had so much struggle with some departments because like he wanted to change the way grading is done, and they pushed back. It's like, no, we want grading to be, you know, numbers. So I know this can be really
scary.
difficult sometimes. Okay. Diversity. Okay, so before going into some questions I had in mind, if you can give us like a brief description of the kind of services and things you do in the Diversity and Inclusion Center,
Yeah.
and maybe if you have, because like you said about VT Great, like you didn't even know it existed, and maybe some people even after they hear about it is like, okay, what do you exactly do, right?
Yeah.
So I actually did not, before meeting you, I didn't know about the Center of Diversity and Inclusion. So if you could, educate me more about it and maybe give me examples of how people like used its services like to achieve something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's the Office of Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, in the graduate school. So it's one of the many offices. They have like an immigration, advising, different, but this office specifically focuses on attending to the needs of historically marginalized people or students, right? So it could be Asian Pacific, Black, Latino, Indigenous. We work closely with all the centers. So Virginia Tech has centers specifically for cultural centers. So Asian American Center or Indigenous Center, LGBTQ Center. So all those centers, we work with them within the graduate school, except that is at the graduate level. So we work with those students, right? So how can students come to our office for help? So anywhere, anything from, because our office obviously is focused not just on recruitment, because we do want a lot of different people, historically marginalized, minoritized students. We want them at the school. But then you get here, we also want to focus on not just diversity, but also on not just recruitment, but also on retention, right? So we have to do programs in a way that make Virginia Tech feel like home for these students. And what does that look like? That could be anywhere from let's just have a pizza night to let's have a conversation about what did I get into with grad school, right? Mm-hmm. So we have a panel discussion of international students talking about their experience here at Virginia Tech, or teaching, right? So we can have a panel where I say, let's invite VT Great to come talk to students who are GTA, but they're not Americans, and they don't understand how teaching works in the U.S., if that makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. So we have programs that cater to people who otherwise might not feel like Virginia Tech is for them. Virginia Tech is a STEM-focused place. Virginia Tech is a predominantly white institution. Virginia Tech is a formerly military institution. Virginia Tech is a land grant institution. So all of these things. So if you come from outside and you don't know these things, what does that mean? How can I fit? How can I find a space here at Virginia Tech, right? So my office does a lot of events, programs, conferences, all of these things that are specifically for a certain type of students. Given we serve all Virginia Tech students. So it's not like we just want only these students. The programs that even tomorrow, 12 to noon in the graduate school, they're going to have like a welcome event for all graduate students at Virginia Tech, where you get to hear about the services we have. My office being one, the graduate senate, like anything that graduate students want or need. This is just like a welcome event. Obviously, there's going to be food. I think the best part of my job is everything we do, there's food. So even when I invite people and they don't want to, I say there's food, they'll come. So food is that niche. But I think I like to tell people when you talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, sometimes people might feel isolated, right? Especially at a place like Virginia Tech. It sounds like, is this just a Black people thing? Or is this just like a minority, LGBT? Like people might feel like anti a certain thing, right? Okay. And I say, when you think about diversity, equity, inclusion, you think about getting invited to a party, right? This is the easy way to remember. Everybody gets invited to the party. But not everybody gets to decide what music is played. Not everybody gets to decide who gets to dance. Mm-hmm. But you could all get to the party, right? So Virginia Tech is this party. We're all here, right? Okay. My office job is to figure out who gets to do what. Who gets to play the music. Who gets to eat. Who gets to... So we're just putting people in places strategically so that they feel like this is also their party. Because if you go to a party, you just stand on the wall. You don't know where the cups are, where the food is. You don't know whose house it is. Am I allowed to do this? But if you invited me to a party and I know you and I've been to your party, I know you, I know your girlfriend, I know who, I could just walk around the house and just feel comfortable, right? Okay. So diversity is just having everybody, part of this thing. A lot of different colorful people. But equity and inclusion is making sure everybody get the same sort of treatment at the time. Because just because we're all at Virginia Tech doesn't necessarily mean we're all equal. Right? We're all GAs, GTA. Like you just talked about, we can both have the same teaching job, but you get more loads, a lot more load. Like you can have 40 students, and I only have 12. But we're both teaching. We're both correcting papers. You'll be done by like midnight, and I'll just be done 2 hours. I'm done. I don't have to. So again, it's not fair. Is it fair to you? We both have the same thing, right? And some of these things are historic, marginal. Like some of these things have nothing to do with you. Right? Maybe I didn't get to go to an expensive school. I didn't get the right prep, right, to enter Virginia Tech. But I figure I got here. So now I'm struggling. I've never used a computer before, maybe, or I don't know how these programs work. But we're in the same class, we're getting the same material. So my office job is to try to help me figure out a way to understand. If you never use a computer, maybe we should have a program for students who this is their first time using a computer because they're already here. Because what can happen if I feel like every time I go to, everybody has a Mac, and this have happened to me before, and I have a PC. I feel like, am I supposed to have a Mac? Like this is, I don't know how to, so then you feel isolated. But then if you come to the grad school, they say, that's fine. You don't have to have a Mac. Everybody here don't have a Mac. It's just, that's what you're comfortable with. So we try to help people find their community here at Virginia Tech.
Okay.
We try to find programs, for example. It's not just that, like I talked to you the other day about, like, if there's issues in the home country, like the students from Iran, when there was this protest, then they come here and say, we need a space to host a conversation because people here feel bad, they can't get in touch with their people back home and things like that. We say, fine, we'll provide the food and the space, and you come and you talk. We've had people come in, like even recently, I said, like my immigration documents, because international students, as you know, they can't work for a certain amount of hours and they can't leave campus, all of these things. Can I do Uber? Like, I want to do Uber. No, you can't. So we said, okay, we keep getting the same questions. We're going to have a panel that we discuss. What can you do as an international student, even though, to answer some of these questions? They have Cranwell. They could go there. But again, to hear it from their fellow graduate student is different than Cranwell saying, if you do that, you're going to go to jail. And then, they feel like they're scared or they feel some sort of power, there. So I think, in a nutshell, that's what we do. We try to make Virginia Tech feel like a community for people of color, for marginalized students, for people who ordinarily don't feel like Virginia Tech is home. That's I think.
That's beautiful. I mean, thank you for helping the community.
Yeah, I hope so. I like my job. Honestly, I really do. I don't.
What is your favorite part of the job?
Food.
Food. Okay. I think that's the favorite part of the students too.
Yes, it's food all the time. Is that, and it's also, I'm right in the middle. Like, I get to find out a lot of things about graduate school. Like, I know VT Create because I'm always at that thing, and my husband was part of it. But I know a lot of resources that I didn't even know about. Like, today I came in here and I was like, oh, we have this podcast. This is something Virginia Tech. I wish Virginia Tech graduate students, besides the fact that we're so stressed and underpaid, I wish you knew how much leverage and things you had access to, right?
Yes, that's
the
true.
Resources that we have as a graduate school. Not a lot of people have that. I did a graduate program here in the U.S., and I could tell you feel so isolated, you have nothing. What Virginia Tech has here, this graduate life center or whatever this thing is, this pod is a nice community. I like it. Not a lot of people have that because as PhD students, we do a lot of things.
And that's really, like, I'm vice president of the CS Graduate Council, Computer Science Graduate Council, and this has been really a really difficult issue, especially after the pandemic, of bringing people back to the community and having a vibrant community.
Yeah.
Because like you said, everyone is like so focused on their research that you have to like really almost pull them out.
Yeah. Yes, you do.
Yeah.
It's hard. That's why we try to. If my office sometimes they'll do program like over 30 socials or bring your kids because again, graduate students are a unique group. We are adults. Just that we're students, but some people are having babies. They have a couple of babies. People are into their lives already, and then you have to figure out. So it's not like undergrads where it's like no class on Tuesday. Everybody, yay! Even when you don't have class as graduate student, you have class. You have something.
Right.
There's
it's
hard to get people out of their little boxes. Right. But I wish a lot more people would make use of like the space. Like I tell people sometimes, I feel like. They feel like I'm doing a favor. I'm like, it's not a favor. You have access. Like when they come to the grad school, I'm like, you can rent a room and, if you have a Zoom meeting, sometimes I used to walk around this library.
Oh, I do that.
Yeah, and there's no space. I'm like, but that says I've started working at the grad school. I don't leave that building. You have everything, right? You have a little library there, a TV lounge. Sometimes you're tired. I just hook up it's a nice center that they have there. And to think that, as part of the graduate education here, you can learn how to teach. You can learn how to do research. You can be a part of the graduate senate and budget. There's a lot of things. And I hope a lot of students, get to take advantage. But again, workload. And some people, I know students here that never leave their lab or their building. They say, I'm in life sciences. That's their building. So when I tell them, even because with the African graduate student, or we have meetings, and I say I'm in the grad school, I would be surprised if someone said, "Where's that?"
Right.
And I'm like, GLC, like but it's not.
Yeah, so I bet some graduate students have never been there. That's true. That's true.
So that's a sad reality.
Okay, I have a couple of questions about diversity. I know we can do 2 episodes only about diversity, but I'll try to keep it short.
Yeah.
Diversity and inclusion has, at least in the past couple of years, has become more and more like prominent and very important, like in any statement of the university and its mission. Even when you want to apply for awards, we want to apply for the position. You always have to have a diversity statement, right? There's always a diversity center, okay, which is great. Like we obviously want the community to feel like included and heard and have some form of social justice there, right? But I think if you also listen to some podcasts or some private conversations, you can hear that some people believe like diversity has created, like, let's say, some mission creep in in their opinion, the school is about education. It's a place you come to learn, and it's slowly the school. I mean, I don't have historic context. Maybe you do, but they believe slowly the university is more becoming about, a place for activism, a place where the administration has to meet certain statistics to meet its diversity and inclusion criteria, and some people are like, okay, but this is not what the university is about, right? Even the whole thing about the statement of diversity and inclusion. I have talked to many people about this statement that you have to include in your applications, and it seems a lot of people feel like there's just something you have to write to sound like you're a nice person, right? But it lacks any genuine sentiment.
Yeah.
So I want to get your opinion on this. Having been working in this diversity and inclusion space, do you agree with these people? It has maybe gone a little too far. Do you think no, we actually need more? Like, how can we make this conversation about diversity and inclusion more genuine or more productive?
Okay, I think for a lot of those people, I think the conversation a lot of times should be about intention, right?
Okay.
So people like to think about the product or what's happening, but we have to think about what is the intention behind this. Like you said, if people are writing diversity statement because they just want to get hired, that it defeats the purpose.
Right.
It's the same thing they do here, like in the social sciences and other places. It's on the wall outside here in the library of Virginia Tech, land acknowledgement, right? Mm-hmm. Land acknowledgement has become part of academia now. You have to say the land we're sitting on is this, this, and the other. All there's certain things that you have to, like, you check a box. There's certain things you have to check the box, but the intention or the intentionality behind diversity, equity, inclusion, like I talked about, is that people feel like they belong in a space, right? Or that just because we're all here doesn't mean we're all equal, because there's historical context, there's different things, and there's the intersectionality of race, gender, class, and all the different things that means, even though we're all in this classroom, we're not the same, right? And if you learn in the contemporary pedagogy class, you understand that all the students in the classroom bring their own different knowledge and lived experiences to the classroom. So in the morning classroom that we're in now, any class that you enter here in Virginia Tech, you're going to see, for the very least, gender differences, right? You see different genders in there. Even if you don't want to talk about race, you still see the differences there that you have to address, you have to acknowledge. So the importance of having diversity at a university is that so we can be able to understand the classrooms that we have. Because the world is changing, as you know. I'm pretty sure Virginia Tech, maybe 20 years ago, classrooms were different.
Right.
And they didn't have the diversity statement. They didn't have all of these things, right? And there's also this awakening in the U.S. that happened in 2020, where everybody's social justice was just forced and pushed into everything. And because we're academics, we perform. We like to be like, this is what we do. We're nice people. So we had to do all of these performing things. But I think anytime diversity, equity, inclusion come out, you have to think about intention before anything. What is the point? Right? Why do I need to do that? Like you should think about what is the people who are saying you should write. If the job is for a professor job, it makes sense because the classroom you're going to be in, you're going to have colorful people, like different colors, different race, different. So you have to say in my statement, like, I respect people, da da da. Even if you don't, if you're faking it, because they want to know how you would be as a teacher. If this job is for in a machine room, in a thing, you're not working with people. What is the intention? Why are we pretending, right? What is the point of this, right? So I think a lot of times the intention is important. If because I'm such a practical person, I like to think about for what? What is the point of this thing, right?
Right.
So even if they do, like a lot of times with the land acknowledgement, I'm like, where are we going with this? Like I understand if you say the land that we sit on, is stolen land, right? And then what?
Right, exactly.
You have to then say, because of that, we are now giving scholarship to us, all like something along those lines. And then also say, like, we acknowledge that, this particular space at Virginia Tech, the campus they in, it used to be a plantation, like Smith Mountain, like, enslaved people work here, blah, 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 blah. Okay. We get it, but what now? Okay. So I think if evolution or like the way the university should function, it should be a place where people learn about the past so you don't repeat the future, right? You learn, you grow. That's how our life works. But to just say, waving diversity, like, we're very diverse, we love all people. And this is some of the reason why my office is important at a graduate school, because a university can write all this nice thing and say, we want black people, we want, Asian people, we want differently able people. And we bring them all in, right? Like Virginia Tech, I feel like I shouldn't say this, but it's terrible with differently able people. Like if you got in a wheelchair here, Mo, and you try to get from this library to the grad school, you will understand how much work needs to be done, right? So it's one thing, we can bring all the people we want, say for, like, this is just physically able people, like you can see that disability physically. Some people you can't even see. So if we brought everybody here in a wheelchair right now, we try to go around campus that day in the wheelchair, then you get to see from that perspective of people in wheelchair at Virginia Tech, like, oh wow, this school sucks. I can't go here. The doors, some of the doors you can't. The wheelchair ramp is broken. Then you start to think from that person's perspective, why is it important that we have an office that cater to that person's need? Because then what is the point? Why do you want to bring these people in when you don't have facilities to have them? But you say, I am diverse. I believe everyone should be equal, right? So it's the same thing with race, gender, all of these things. We want diversity as a university, but when they get here, we have to support that. So I think the diversity office, that's where it serves as, not as the police, but like as the person who helps to mediate, like the people you already brought here, how do we make this place feel good? As for the statement, I think it should be required because as professors, we just talk about how important teaching is. You are going to have a global classroom. Even if you don't teach in the U.S., if you teach outside of the U.S., you're going to be crazy because then there's ethnic differences. There's all kinds of things. It's not just race. It might not be called diversity, equity, inclusion, but it might be differences there that you have to juggle. As far as saying you think diversity is just too much, it's gone too far, I think for a place like the U.S., there's always going to be that. See, Germany, South Africa, a lot of places that have similar, really terrible historical background like the U.S., they've addressed their issue to the point where they acknowledge it. They have conversation about it. You can go to Germany. You can go to the Holocaust Museum. This thing is in your face. It's not like, don't talk about it. In the U.S., like you said, if you talk about slavery, it's just one way, or it's like, why are we don't talk about it. Right. Why can't we talk about it? The truth of the matter is where me and you sit right now, this land was enslaved people, plantation. People were property that looked like me. So, and the fact that now I'm in the classroom, that's a big change. Then what, right? So we have to how do we include this conversation without it feeling and then get past.
Right.
But I think people don't want to acknowledge it. And that's why we are where we are. Because people just like to, I don't want to talk about it. Why do we have to talk about it? It's not, it doesn't bother me. It's like, just talk about it as an institution of learning, learn, and then, but to just say, let's move on. You can move on because there's people who are still stuck on that and they want to talk about it all the time. So that's why diversity.
I actually really like your point and I agree with you. Like, there's definitely always like things we should talk about the problem, be explicit and comfortable talking about the problem so we can, see how to address it and move on, right? But I think that's very different from how diversity and inclusion is done in some places or at some levels, where it just becomes like a checkbox or a,
Yeah.
like you said, like a plaque put on the
On the
wall,
wall.
like we acknowledge that this land, the indigenous people lived on this land, or the diversity statement just becomes about just pleasantries, just
It's a
make them
checkbox.
make them hear what they want to hear, so you're like, oh, okay, you look like a nice guy.
Yeah, but
But-
that's not the intention. It shouldn't be that way, but
Right, but
sorry.
that's the thing. Like, I remember there's a Lebanese play that I listened to once. It's like in the play they keep saying we're brothers and sisters, we love each other, but they have a lot of problems. We're brothers and sisters, we love each other. And then at some point the main character says, if we're really brothers and sisters, why do you have to keep saying it?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that's how I feel the conversation of inclusion and diversity sometimes happen. It's like something we repeat without actually talking about it. So
Because I think
yeah.
diversity has always been at the university,
Right.
right? We just didn't have a label
Right.
of what we're calling it now, and include. Now they even went past like diversity, equity, inclusion, and something practical. Like they'll keep adding on things to make it sexy.
Right, exactly.
You want to be like you're more concerned
Exactly.
compared to other people, and again, that's what.
It is about how it's about. I would go as far as say it's like a facade at some level. It's like they just want to look in a certain way.
It's but it's
Yeah.
the same with all of academia though. It's not
Okay.
just diversity, right? It's academia. Like think about all the people who are well decorated. They write all these papers. You meet some of them. I'm sorry, I don't know if I can say that. They are assholes.
Right.
No,
I agree.
you meet these people. You looked forward to. You've seen their work.
Right.
You're like, oh, it's like a. And then you meet them. They have either no people skills. They're really terrible to grad students. They treat people like crap. Like, and you're like, so what does this perform on paper? They are just amazing person. If they wrote their bio and you're about to introduce them, you're like, wow, this person is doing. No, they're not. You meet them. It's such performance because you have to do these things to get to this next level in academia and do this. So as a university, let's not forget the institution itself is deeply rooted in the history and context of where it is. The U.S. university is very capitalistic. It's funding. So in order to get funding, the VT had like the most diverse class of 2020 like coming in because they had a lot of student of color.
Right.
But if you bring them here, now you have to figure out how to keep them here.
Sure.
But that's not the thing. The thing is, boom, we are the most diverse class.
Right.
Boom. So it's about selling points. It's about looking good. Diversity is sexy right now. So that's why everybody's like, but it's not. It shouldn't be that way, unfortunately. Right. And I think people who are like, oh, I'm so tired of hearing it, they're rightfully so. Because if you imagine people who work in that office, when you go to these conferences, you go to places, it's sad. You see the performance. You can see people just saying what needs to be said so that you can say, wow. But if you went to the schools, you're like, okay, so we have 40% African American. That's wonderful. What is the graduation rate?
Right, that's
Then
a whole
and it's a
different
different conversation. Why are these people coming in but they're not
Right.
leaving? Like, what is it that you're not focusing
Right.
on? What are you not? What so?
It is like a band-aid, not really solving the root of the problem.
Right, and I think
Right.
people misuse diversity too.
Right.
Sometimes it's really not diversity. It's just whatever.
All right. I know I have kept you so long. I just want to ask you one last brief question, and then we can wrap it up. I have joined you on GPP trip, which is a global perspective program. We went to Europe. We had an opportunity to see the European education system and how it's different from US. I just want to get your one thing you learned from that trip that it was an eye opener for you, like something you did not know and you feel you've learned, and how did it influence your way of thinking about education?
I think since we were just talking about diversity, I think for me it's definitely the diversity piece. Is as someone from the global south, I like to think, Western knowledge, Western things. This is like the European system is so much different from the U.S. system. Like it's not fair to just group them all and be like Western education, because it's really not. And the diversity, equity, inclusion as it is in the U.S. doesn't exist in that context. Not that they don't have issues, but it's not a thing. Like it's not like they're not actively looking for historically marginalized people or trying to bring them into the conversation or trying to there are some universities who are just now having conversation about pronouns or having conversation about gender issues or trying to change their brochures to so things that seem like really like now because it's slowly making its way there because you have to think about the European education system has a lot longer history than the US. But I think yeah, for me that was I was like, wow, really? Like that's not a thing because Europe have the same if not more like the immigration like issues, like a lot of different people, like
especially recently, yeah.
Right, black, brown, yellow, different kind of people. So I'm confused as to why there's not some sort of pipeline or programming around how do these people matriculate or how do these people assimilate into the education system, right? It's just it's education. They see students as students. Everyone is on the level playing field. Is very blind to that aspect, and that was for me. It was very different because obviously I only know the U.S. context of things, so it's not like it's not there, but it's not called that. So if it has a different name, I don't know.
I think the word blindness that you used is actually exactly the same, exactly descriptive. It's like, yeah, you're just a student, and we're gonna treat you equally, but there's no label for it.
Yeah, I think the closest thing they had to different was like the refugee conversation that we talked about recently. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that came up, but not.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Zuleka, I had an immense pleasure hosting you today.
Of course.
I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too.
And thank you again for accepting being a guest here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And thank you everyone for being with us. And until I see you in the next episode.
Okay.
Have a good day.
All right.